I am New York.
Я сам Нью-Йорк.
I am New York.
Yo soy Nueva York.
Sono New York.
Je suis New York.
Welcome to DiverseCITY, where we explore New York's eclectic enclaves, one neighborhood at a time. I'm Zyphus Lebrun. This month we're coming to you from Silver Lake Park on Staten Island. The borough is home to more than 10,000 acres of parkland. Though it's called the Forgotten Borough, Staten Island is a major part of New York City's front line of defense against storm surges and the flooding that comes with them. A big part of that bulwark against the deluge is the borough's approximately 2,700 acres of wetlands. The island's array of swamps, bogs, marshes, and meadows account for more than half of all the wetlands in New York City. As we'll find out later on in this episode, Staten Island's wetlands played a major role in saving lives during Hurricane Sandy. The island, as a green wall, if you will, has become increasingly important as the conversation about climate change takes center stage. That debate is very nuanced and is playing out in a microcosm as local government officials and residents on Staten Island debate the best way forward: conserve the land for the future or develop for the present. On this episode, Fall of the Wall, a row over the building of a seawall could cost lives during the next major storm. Big box blunder, local activists' long fight to protect a very important wetland from being bulldozed for a BJ's. And park protectors, close to a half century of fighting to preserve green space and parkland on Staten Island. Those stories and more coming up on DiverseCITY. An impasse between the local and federal government is holding up the construction of a seawall that could save lives on Staten Island's eastern shore. Shannon Ayala has the details.
My family has been in this house I'm sitting in since 1918 or so. My great-grandfather built it.
A decade ago, Paul Liotta's century-old family house was wrecked by Hurricane Sandy.
I got up to like a little bit of the second floor. This was all like gutted out.
Liotta reports for the Staten Island Advance. He's been tracking the delayed East Shore seawall, a 5-mile-long coastal barrier which is expected to mitigate such disasters happening in the future.
The South Shore Coastal Storm Risk Management Project, which actually will protect the east shore of Staten Island, will be built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And it's a 5.3-mile long project that will protect Staten Island shoreline with a series of buried seawalls, berms, and levees.
Jainey Bavishi runs the Mayor's Office of Resiliency, which oversees a multi-billion-dollar plan to defend the city from an increasingly hostile climate. She says it's urgent to get the East Shore seawall built.
I think the most important thing to remember about this project is that the communities that will be protected by this project were actually among the most heavily impacted by Hurricane Sandy. More than half of the New Yorkers who lost their lives from Sandy were Staten Islanders that died either on the East Shore or the South Shore of Staten Island.
But there's a bureaucratic holdup. Construction on the seawall can't start until adjacent Graniteville Park is cleaned up of radioactive waste.
Basically, the holdup now is that there's this like environmental remediation that has to happen at the southern end of the project. It's related to like landfill strategies that, we're talking like 40s, 50s, 1930s even. But what they used to fill it in a lot of the time was not environmentally sound stuff. So I think one of the things they found are like X-ray machines, that kind of thing.
Work on the seawall is stalled because the city and state are in a disagreement with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers as to who is responsible for cleaning up the radioactive park. The Corps, which in part undertakes civil works projects to prevent disasters, announced the seawall project in 2015. In 2017, the city, state, Congress, and Army Corps signed a protective partnership agreement funneling millions of federal funds into the wall, cutting red tape, and launching the design phase. Bavishi says the city and state understood that the Army Corps would be responsible for doing the work and the city would foot the bill. But that changed in 2020.
So about a year ago, the Army Corps informed the city and the state that they had changed their interpretation of an internal policy, and this would prevent them from performing the remediation without a policy waiver from the Army Corps headquarters in Washington, D.C.
Army Corps headquarters denied the waiver request. This year, a spokesperson told the news outlet, The City, such a cleanup job has little precedent for Army Corps, so it's unlikely DCHQ would sign off on it. Liotta says Army Corps is doing other remediation work in the park, but not the toxic site near the seawall project, because it's a superfund, a contaminated area the federal government seeks to have cleaned up.
They are handling work in the park, but this little strip of land just outside the park, they're not going to do, apparently. And that has been what everybody's been trying to figure out. How do we get the Army Corps of Engineers to move forward with what it had previously led people to believe they were going to handle?
Our attempts to get a response from the Corps were to no avail. Liotta is trying to get under the surface to see why exactly the Army Corps seemed to change its mind. He's waiting on a Freedom of Information Act request, known as a FOIA.
I have a FOIA out that I've been waiting a while for that I don't know if I'll ever get back. Just kind of trying to get a behind-the-scenes look at what exactly transpired.
Liotta says the initial 2022 completion date on the wall will likely be pushed back to 2026. Meanwhile, Bavishi says Army Corps is working on other pieces of the project.
They're actually going to be focusing on interior drainage construction first. Basically, whenever we build a flood wall, we want to make sure that we also make improvements to drainage behind the flood wall so that when it rains, we're not creating a bathtub and trapping the water in. And so those are the contracts that are currently teed up to move into construction first.
The Resiliency Office has many projects underway to protect the city from the dangerous weather wrought by climate change. But Bavishi says the East Shore seawall is front of mind.
We consider this an incredibly high priority project, and we're working to resolve this issue as quickly as possible. The mayor himself actually engaged Secretary Howland, the Secretary of the Department of the Interior, so that we can explore other solutions to get this work done with the National Park Service. So those conversations are quite active and seem promising. We're working very hard to make sure that this doesn't end up being an issue that holds the project timeline up.
Liotta says U.S. Senator Chuck Schumer is putting up a big fight to get the needed work underway. Borough President James Otto and Member of Congress Nicole Maliotakis have joined Schumer in the battle to get the seawall built. Shannon Ayala for DiverseCITY.
A group of local activists has been in a protracted battle with the developer to save the Graniteville Wetlands. 23 acres of the 42-acre woodlands on Staten Island's North Shore are already being bulldozed to make way for a 28-acre development that will include an 838-space parking lot, a gas station, and a BJ's wholesale club. Earlier this year, the Graniteville Wetlands was still a verdant valley, a bastion of biodiversity that had helped the area weather the ravages of Superstorm Sandy.
We had trees down, we had electrical lines down, but we were not flooded because of this wetland. And we had somebody from NOAA tell us that the wetland saved us. And they said, if we lose the wetland, we will be flooded.
That's exactly what happened in September, after bulldozers and backhoes raised nearly 80% of trees on the land to begin construction on a parking lot and a BJ's big box store.
That part of the freshwater wetland was no longer absorbing water. It's no longer a wetland. So that was August 31st. By September 1st, we were flooded. And that's something that I had been saying for 4 years. If we lose the wetland, we're going to be flooded. And the next day after August 31st, 80% were down. We were flooded on September 1st.
And what happened on September 1st? Was it just a storm? What happened then?
It was Hurricane Ida, and it was just supposed to be the remnants of Hurricane Ida, but we had a tremendous torrential rain.
Gabriella Velarde Ward is the co-founder of a collective of grassroots organizations that have been fighting to preserve the wetlands for 4 years. She says that the effort is not just about environmental justice. It's about saving people's lives.
60 to 70% of the people here are people of color. And then on the other side of the wetland, there is a mobile home community, the only one in the city, and they are elderly, disabled, and low income, and some survivors of Hurricane Sandy.
The problem with the wetlands goes back to the 1970s, when the developer, Joseph A. LLC, started buying up the land. Back then, there was no legislation in place to protect wetlands such as these.
The city owned it, was in fiscal crisis of 75. The developer bought the tidal wetland, the creek, in 1977. They bought the freshwater wetland in 1984. At that time, there was a lot of going back and forth about listing the wetlands and protections for what and all of that. So they thought they had a right to build on everything.
The developer's ownership of the property is only part of the issue. They have promised to bring nearly 200 local jobs to the area, and that's won them some political support. Both the outgoing borough president, James Otto, and city councilwoman Debbie Rhodes backed the construction. Several attempts to get them to comment for this piece were to no avail. The New York Times did report in October of last year that they both felt that a special permit that allowed for a facility of more than 10,000 square feet to be built was better than allowing construction to continue unchecked. The permit also stipulates that nearly 11 acres of the wetland to the south of the construction should be protected. But even those concessions aren't enough for Velarde Ward, who says the construction should not be happening at all because there was never a proper environmental impact statement.
Now, when I was studying architecture, I learned that an environmental impact statement has to compare the project to no project so that you can actually see the effect on the community. This one compared the project, this huge project that I just talked about, to a slightly smaller one. And so there was no effect, and nobody stopped them.
Velarde Ward says she's also concerned about people moving away because of the exorbitant cost of flood insurance. Some of her neighbors reported tens of thousands in damages due to the flooding caused by Hurricane Ida.
For the condo community itself, for exterior flood insurance, it costs between $200,000 and $400,000 a year, which will bankrupt us. Yes. And so for people in the mobile home community, depending on their elevation, they would have to pay between $8,000 and $32,000 a year. And these are low-income people and handicapped and disabled and elderly. Yeah.
Despite their best efforts, construction has continued on the site. However, Velarde Ward says she remains undaunted in her effort to raise awareness about this issue and its sundry effects on the community.
Climate change is real, so people have to wake up to it, and they've got to be engaged. They've got to be doing something about it.
You just heard about the effort to save a natural wetland on Staten Island's North Shore. Now, Craig Thompson will tell us about a multi-million-dollar water management project that is helping ease the specter of flooding by creating man-made wetlands in the Mid-Island and South Shore sections of the borough. He explains to us why this has also been a labor of love.
This intersection of Highland Boulevard and Seaver Avenue near Dongan Hills in Staten Island is part of an extensive drainage system called a Bluebelt. It was created to address the overflowing septic systems that would cause a foul-smelling mess in communities throughout the borough during heavy rains.
So this particular site is part of New Creek. It's part of the New Creek watershed. We've planted these wetland plants here that you see, and to create this system that will store the water during a storm that's coming out of the storm sewers over there in Highland Boulevard, and also will treat the water. This will be here basically forever. I mean, this is a permanent part of the drainage system for this neighborhood.
Dana Gumb, a land use planner familiar with floodwater management, was brought on to help mitigate this water management crisis in the early 1990s. He says it was important to work within Staten Island's existing ecosystems when designing and creating the Bluebelt.
Rather than just obliterating all of these creeks and all the wetlands with storm sewers, we designed a new drainage system that still had the storm sewers in the streets and gave everybody the drainage that they need. But instead of those storm sewers going down to a giant trunk storm sewer, we preserved the creek and had discharge points for the storm sewers into the creek.
The system is called a Bluebelt, a stream corridor where water can drain and rest, and where the pollutants are collected in root systems or in trash racks.
We're improving the quality of the water as it goes down into the stream system.
When Hurricane Ida hit, this man-made wetland did its job.
I've heard from the staff on site here, the construction staff, and also from the borough president. Borough president wrote a very good letter explaining that this space stored a lot of stormwater that otherwise would have been in streets or basements or wherever.
Since the early 1990s, over 90 watersheds have been constructed across the island, with 20 more on the way. And as the lead on the $75 million project, Gumb, who recently retired, has been with it since the beginning.
And this has been my baby. It's been my life's work. It has combined all my interests, wetlands and property and engineering and planning. All of my interests are all bundled up in this program. And the program will live forever, in one form or another. And that's very satisfying to know that you're creating something that's going to be around for a very long time.
For DiverseCITY, I'm Craig Thompson.
Freshkills Park is going through a major makeover. The 2,200-acre plot of land, named for a nearby estuary, was once the largest landfill in the world before it closed in 2001. Since then, the landscape has been engineered with new soil and infrastructure. The park is now being touted as a green space for nature and nurturing interest in science and art. The president of the Freshkills Park Alliance, Eloise Hirsh, tells us more about the transition in her own words.
This is a household garbage landfill. That means that what's in it is what's in your kitchen, what's in your garage. It's you. And so one of the major lessons that this landfill has is not only that we can fix what we broke, but also that this is the result of the waste that's in this society. The landfill was a Robert Moses project. He told the people of Staten Island he would just come for 2 to 3 years. They would fill this pestilential land. It was all wetlands. And that 2 to 3 years turned into 10 and 20 and 30 and 40 and 50. And as you can imagine, Staten Islanders got angrier and angrier. It really took, in fact, the confluence of 3 Republican elected officials, then Governor George Pataki, Mayor Rudy Giuliani, and of course the Republican elected officials of Staten Island, to finally get the political will to close the landfill. This was New York City's major garbage dump for 50 years. And Freshkills Park is making it into the largest park that has been built in New York City in the last 100 years, but also it is in fact the largest landfill to park transformation in the world. It was engineered to manage the 2 products that landfills make, which is landfill gas and leachate. The landfill gas, everybody kind of knows about. That's a complicated engineering process, which involves miles and miles of pipes. Leachate is the liquid that percolates through mounds of decomposing trash. And there's another set of pipes that manages that. Then on top of that are layers and layers and layers of fill and soil. The park is going to be opening in segments. In fact, there are pieces of the park that are currently open, but they're just right at the edges. We are providing education programs and field trips. We have some art programs that happen. My staff creates as many opportunities as we can think of to bring the public to the site. And during the pandemic, this team created a whole array of virtual experiences, virtual education programs, virtual tours, which actually turned out to be incredibly valuable to teachers in schools. We really want people to think about their personal responsibility about managing waste, about sustainability. Yes, you can make something beautiful, but at what cost previously? It's playing a role in a sort of a changing image of Staten Island and the opportunities that there are for Staten Island. And it eventually will be a genuine tourist destination. And in a way, it's kind of like Bear Mountain in New York City.
Finally from us, a community organization on the island has been advocating to preserve the borough's green space for nearly 50 years. Vanessa Monet tells us more about the protectors of Pine Oak Woods.
If you're familiar with Staten Island is the borough of parks. And you could walk from Clay Pit on the South Shore up to the Goodyear Woods on the North Shore, and all in between, there are parks, in large part because of the work of Protectors of Pine Oak Woods.
Cliff Hagen is the president of Protectors of Pine Oak Woods, a land conservation not-for-profit on Staten Island that dates back to 1975.
Our mission is about educating the public and making it possible for our elected representatives to spend the tax dollars to preserve those properties. So a lot of our work is in our education, our free weekend programs, our free annual calendar that we share with our membership. We have monthly workshops, we have seasonal 10-mile hikes across the island.
3 men, Richard Bugler, Joe Fernicola, and Ed Milanese, started the organization as a means of preserving the South Shore's unique ecology. While there's no wooded area on Staten Island called Pine Oak Woods, the men named the organization for the local trees they sought to preserve.
The most common species of trees in that area, they're pine trees, southern pines, and oak trees. There's some hybrid oaks on Staten Island. So Protectors of the Pine Oak Woods seemed to make sense that.
What started off as 3 men has grown to a much larger membership.
We have over 1,000 members, and they are passionate. They volunteer willingly. And so it's a joy to be part of the administration of an organization where just people are engaged and excited about the work we do.
Those 1,000 members each provide around $20 in dues annually, which is the large majority of the Protectors' funding. Periodically, they also receive financial support from local politicians and some donations from local businesses.
Like right now, we're working on a grant from Con Edison, who's kind enough to sponsor a butterfly checklist that we're doing, right? So we do get some outside funding on occasion.
As the Protectors of Pine Oak Woods continues their fight to preserve the woodlands of Staten Island, there is hope that the rest of New York City is listening and learning.
It's a conversation we need to have across the city, of course, climate change, and our advocacy here, educating our elected representatives here, the intention with their sharing that education with their colleagues, their counterparts, their peers across the city. Hoping to bring awareness, and with awareness, of course, comes change.
For DiverseCITY, I'm Vanessa Monet.
That's our special look at Staten Island as part of New York City's mitigation system against climate change. Join us next month when we'll head over to Two Bridges, a Manhattan neighborhood that borders Chinatown. Till then, thanks for joining us as we explore our diverse city.